Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. Not because of a loud noise, not because of stress, not because your phone buzzed. You simply wake up. The fire is still glowing. Outside, the stars fill the sky. A few people nearby are already awake. One person quietly adds another log to the fire. An elderly woman sits silently, staring into the flames. A hunter stretches before lying back down. No one seems surprised. No one complains about insomnia. No one thinks something is wrong. Because for much of human history, waking in the middle of the night may have been completely normal. Today, if someone wakes up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, the reaction is often immediate. Why can't I sleep? Is something wrong with me? Am I getting insomnia? Millions of people check the clock, worry about tomorrow, and desperately try to force themselves back to sleep. Modern society has taught us that healthy sleep means one uninterrupted block lasting roughly 8 hours. Anything less feels like failure. Sleep tracking apps reward continuous sleep. Medical websites often list frequent nighttime awakenings as something worth paying attention to. We have become so accustomed to uninterrupted sleep that many people assume humans have always slept this way. History tells a far more interesting story. For centuries, people across Europe described something called the first sleep. Not their only sleep, their first sleep. Hours later came something called the second sleep. Between those two periods was a quiet stretch of wakefulness that many people accepted as completely ordinary. Imagine hearing that idea for the first time. Instead of worrying after waking in the middle of the night, imagine expecting it. Imagine believing that the night was only halfway finished. At first, that sounds almost unbelievable. But historians have uncovered hundreds of references suggesting this pattern may once have been remarkably common. To understand why, we first need to forget almost everything about modern evenings. Tonight, after sunset, most cities remain alive. Streetlights illuminate every road. Televisions glow through apartment windows. Restaurants remain open. Computers continue working. Phones keep buzzing. Artificial light allows millions of people to stay awake long after darkness arrives. Our ancestors lived in a completely different world. Thousands of years ago, sunset changed everything. Darkness wasn't merely inconvenient. It transformed daily life. Without electricity, every source of light required effort. Someone had to gather firewood. Someone had to make candles. Someone had to buy expensive oil for lamps. Light itself was valuable. As a result, many families simply went to bed not long after the sun disappeared. In winter, that sometimes meant spending 12 or even 14 hours between sunset and sunrise. Imagine trying to sleep continuously for 14 hours. For many people, that would be surprisingly difficult. Researchers have suggested that this unusually long period of darkness may have encouraged a different rhythm of sleep. People would fall asleep soon after nightfall. Several hours later, they would naturally wake, not fully energized, not ready to begin working, simply awake. This peaceful period could last anywhere from a few minutes to more than an hour. Historical descriptions suggest that people used this time in remarkably ordinary ways. Some prayed. Some reflected on dreams. Some quietly talked with family members lying nearby. Some checked on animals. Some added wood to the fire. Some simply lay awake, thinking. Eventually, drowsiness returned. Without anxiety, without forcing it, without checking a clock. They simply drifted into what they called their second sleep. If this sounds unfamiliar, that's because modern society rarely talks about it. Yet for generations, people may have considered it one of the most ordinary experiences of the night. The question is, how do historians know any of this? After all, no one was recording sleep with smartwatches hundreds of years ago. The answer begins with thousands of forgotten pages hidden inside old books, personal diaries, medical writings, court records, and letters. And one historian who noticed that people kept mentioning something almost everyone else had overlooked. The idea of first sleep might sound like an internet myth. It isn't. One of the historians most closely associated with this discovery is Roger Ekirch. For years, Ekirch wasn't studying sleep at all. His research focused on everyday life before the Industrial Revolution. While reading thousands of historical documents, something unexpected kept appearing. Again and again, people casually mentioned their first sleep. At first, it seemed insignificant. Perhaps it was simply an unusual expression. But then the references kept coming. Medical books, personal diaries, religious writings, poetry, court testimony, letters between family members, even works by famous authors. People described events that happened after the first sleep. Others mentioned returning to bed for the second sleep. No explanation was ever included. That detail is surprisingly important. Imagine opening a modern diary and reading, "I had breakfast at 8." The writer doesn't explain what breakfast is. There is no need. Everyone already understands. Historians often use this kind of evidence to identify behaviors that were completely ordinary. If something requires explanation, it probably isn't common. If nobody bothers explaining it, people probably assumed everyone already knew exactly what it meant. That is exactly what Eckhart found. Across hundreds of historical sources, first sleep appeared as if it were simply part of everyday language. The pattern stretched across several centuries, particularly in parts of medieval and early modern Europe. This does not mean every person followed the same routine, nor does it mean every culture on Earth slept this way. History almost never works that neatly. Different climates, different religions, different occupations, different seasons, all shaped how people lived. A shepherd sleeping beneath the stars did not experience the night the same way as a merchant inside a crowded city. A monk inside a monastery followed different routines than a fisherman living beside the sea. Human history contains enormous diversity. That diversity matters. Still, the repeated appearance of first sleep and second sleep suggests that segmented sleep was familiar enough to become ordinary for many communities. What happened during that quiet period between the two sleeps? Historical accounts paint a surprisingly peaceful picture. Some people prayed. The silence of the night was often considered the perfect time for private devotion. Others reflected on dreams. In many ancient and medieval traditions, dreams were believed to carry meaning. Waking naturally offered an opportunity to think about them before they faded away. Some couples talked quietly. Some even used this period for intimacy. Several historical medical writers suggested that the hours after first sleep were particularly suitable for conception because both body and mind had rested. Whether that belief was scientifically accurate is another question. What matters is that people clearly viewed this period as useful rather than problematic. Others simply added another piece of wood to the fire. They checked livestock, listened for unusual sounds outside, made sure children remained warm. Then, almost effortlessly, sleep returned. Imagine how different that mindset was from today. Now imagine waking at 2 in the morning. Within seconds, many people reach for their phones. A bright screen floods the eyes with artificial light. The brain immediately becomes more alert. The clock announces exactly how many hours remain before work. Anxiety begins. I only have 4 hours left. What if I can't fall asleep again? Ironically, that worry itself often makes sleep even more difficult. Our ancestors experienced something very different. There were no glowing screens, no digital clocks, no endless social media feeds waiting beside the bed. Night remained dark, quiet, slow. Time itself felt different. For them, waking briefly may not have represented a failure to sleep. It may simply have been another chapter of the night. But this raises an even bigger question. Was segmented sleep something created by culture? Or was it built into human biology itself? To answer that, researchers would eventually perform experiments unlike anything historians could have imagined. For centuries, historians believed the idea of first sleep belonged entirely to the past. Then, something unexpected happened. Scientists began asking a different question. What would happen if modern people lived without artificial light? Not for one night, not for a weekend camping trip, but for weeks. Several sleep researchers designed experiments in which volunteers spent long periods exposed only to natural patterns of daylight and darkness. When evening arrived, there were no phones, no televisions, no laptops, no bright LED lighting. After sunset, participants experienced only dim natural light. As the days passed, something remarkable began to happen. Instead of sleeping in one uninterrupted block, several volunteers gradually developed 2 distinct periods of sleep. They would fall asleep shortly after darkness, wake naturally several hours later, remain peacefully awake for a period, then drift effortlessly into a second sleep before sunrise. Researchers also observed changes in hormone patterns, particularly melatonin, the hormone closely associated with regulating sleep. These findings attracted enormous public attention. Newspapers quickly declared that scientists had proved humans are naturally supposed to sleep twice every night. But science is rarely that simple. The experiments were fascinating. They were also limited. The number of participants was relatively small. The conditions were artificial. Living inside a sleep laboratory is not the same as living in a medieval village. Researchers were not recreating ancient history. They were studying how modern human bodies respond to long periods of darkness. Those are two very different questions. This distinction matters. Science becomes stronger when it recognizes uncertainty rather than pretending certainty exists. Today, many sleep researchers agree on one important point. Human sleep appears to be remarkably flexible. Rather than possessing only one correct sleeping pattern, our brains seem capable of adapting to different environments. Consider the diversity of human societies. A hunter living near the Arctic Circle experiences winter nights that can last almost 20 hours. Someone living near the equator experiences far more consistent daylight throughout the year. A nomadic family sleeping beneath open skies faces different conditions than merchants living inside crowded cities. Monks waking for nighttime prayers follow different routines than soldiers guarding city walls. Even within the same village, people may not have slept identically. Parents caring for infants, older adults, teenagers, night watchmen. Their nights naturally differed. Human history has never been uniform. That is why historians avoid making universal claims. Instead of saying, everyone slept twice, they say something much more careful. Historical evidence strongly suggests that segmented sleep was common in certain places and periods. That statement is supported by documents. The broader claim that all humans throughout history naturally slept in two separate blocks remains far more difficult to prove. This careful approach is one of the strengths of historical research. The goal is not to force simple answers. The goal is to understand the past as honestly as possible. Still, one question remains. If segmented sleep may once have been common, why did it largely disappear? The answer may have less to do with biology, and far more to do with one invention that quietly transformed every human civilization: artificial light. Before electricity, darkness controlled people's schedules. After electricity, people began controlling the darkness. And that changed the night forever. The disappearance of segmented sleep did not happen overnight. It happened gradually. For thousands of years, the setting sun marked the end of the day. Darkness was something people accepted. Then humanity began pushing it back. First came better candles, then brighter oil lamps. Later, gas lamps illuminated entire city streets. Finally, electricity transformed the night forever. For the first time in history, millions of people could turn night into day with the flip of a switch. At first, this seemed like pure progress. Factories could operate longer. Shops remained open after sunset. People could read late into the evening. Entertainment no longer depended on daylight. Cities became alive long after dark. But this new freedom quietly changed something else: bedtime. Imagine a family living in Europe 500 years ago. After sunset, there was little to do. Conversation slowed. The fire burned lower. Eventually, everyone went to sleep. Now imagine a modern family. The television is still on. Phones continue buzzing. Someone is watching videos. Someone else is answering emails. Bright LED lights fill every room. Midnight arrives almost unnoticed. Without realizing it, bedtime has shifted several hours later than it would have for most of human history. Yet sunrise has not changed. Work still begins in the morning. School still starts early. Alarm clocks became the new sunrise. Instead of waking naturally, millions of people now wake because a machine tells them to. The result is a much shorter window between bedtime and morning. There is often no longer enough time for two separate periods of sleep. The gap between first sleep and second sleep slowly disappeared. Eventually, many people forgot it had ever existed. Then another force accelerated the change: the Industrial Revolution. Factories required workers to arrive at precise hours. Railroads followed strict timetables. Businesses demanded standardized schedules. For perhaps the first time in history, Millions of unrelated people were expected to organize their lives according to the same clock. Nature became less important. The clock became everything. Sleep adapted once again. But this is where modern myths often begin. Some articles on the internet claim that segmented sleep is the true, natural way humans are supposed to sleep. The evidence does not support such a confident conclusion. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. We adapted to deserts. We adapted to rainforests. We adapted to frozen tundra. We adapted to farming villages. We adapted to crowded cities. It should not surprise us that we also adapted to different ways of sleeping. Some people today naturally sleep through the night without waking. Others occasionally wake for a short period before falling asleep again. Neither experience automatically means something is wrong. History reminds us that human sleep has never been as uniform as we often imagine. Perhaps the greatest lesson is not that our ancestors slept twice. It is that they lived in a completely different relationship with the night. Imagine one final time that you were living thousands of years ago. The fire burns softly beside you. Outside, the stars stretch across a sky untouched by electric light. You wake naturally. The camp is quiet. Someone nearby whispers a prayer. Another person adds wood to the fire. A child turns over beneath a warm animal skin. No one reaches for a phone. No glowing clock tells you it is 2:17 a.m. No anxiety fills your mind. The night simply continues. After a while, your eyelids grow heavy again. You lie back down. The second sleep begins. Perhaps that is the real lesson hidden inside this forgotten chapter of history. Not that ancient people discovered a better way to sleep. Not that modern people are sleeping incorrectly. But that the human body has always been capable of adapting to the world around it. As the world changed, our nights changed, our routines changed, our sleep changed. History rarely tells us that there is only one correct way to live. Instead, it reminds us that what feels perfectly normal today may simply be one moment in a much longer human story. The next time you wake in the middle of the night, remember this. For countless generations before electricity, before factories, before smartphones, before alarm clocks, you might not have been awake because something was wrong. You might have been awake because, for much of human history, the night was never meant to be experienced all at once.